Fiance's on the floor with blood everywhere. I can't see anything. There's nothing broken. I think her head. I think she hit her head. I think she may have slipped. There's blood on the table. Her face is a little purple. She stabbed herself.
Where?
She fell with a knife. Oh no, her knife's sticking out. There's a knife sticking out of her heart.
But she stabbed herself?
I guess so. I don't know where she fell on it. I don't know. It's a long knife.
Don't touch anything. Yeah, don't touch anything. Okay?
I'm not touching anything. I can't believe this though.
So wait, it was just you there with her?
We're the only ones here. And I saw was
was
yelling
your house
and
broken into?
No.
So there's no sign of a break-in?
No sign of a break-in at all. I mean, there will be when you get here because I had to break the latch. But
Drew, what you just heard was an excerpt of Sam's excited 911 phone call to the Philadelphia Police Department upon breaking into his own apartment and finding his fiancée, Ellen Greenberg, lying on the floor covered in blood and vicious wounds. We covered most of that 911 call and how a lot of people who are covering this case, following this case, that's one of the biggest indicators that Sam's lying, that Sam doesn't have a coherent story when it comes to how he left the apartment and how he came back and what he found. Before we move on to the evidence that perhaps got ignored in this case, also some maybe investigation failures from police officers, the first ones at the scenes, the forensics problems that we had. We're going to do a deep dive on things that were processed incorrectly or misinterpreted at the scene, and how we're gonna look at how all these problems kind of coalesce together with Ellen's death being ruled as self-inflicted rather as a homicide. But let me go to the supercut. You should know that this is a very, very condensed portion of the 911 call, but it does have Sam offering up theories about what happened to Ellen, even in the midst of him being given directions on how to save her life. These are the clips that have Sam talking about his theories of what happened to Ellen, which is really premature. You know, she hasn't been declared dead. Saving her is not a lost cause at this point, but we're already speculating on a rather about what happened to her.
Fiance's on the floor with blood everywhere. I can't see anything. There's nothing broken. I think her head. I think she hit her head. I think she may have slipped. There's blood on the table. Her face is a little purple. She stabbed herself.
Where?
She fell with a knife. Oh no, her knife's sticking out. There's a knife sticking out of her heart.
But she stabbed herself?
I guess so. I don't know where she fell on it. I don't know. It's a long knife.
Don't touch anything. Yeah, don't touch anything. Okay?
I'm not touching anything. I can't believe this though.
So wait, it was just you there with her?
We're the only ones here. And I saw was
was your house
yelling
broken into?
No.
So there's no sign of a break-in?
No sign of a break-in at all. I mean, there will be when you get here because I had to break the latch. But
so that was a brief supercut of some of Sam's most interesting moments from the 911 call. Obviously, when you're in the thick of it, when your emotions are high and you're seeing something that you're perceiving but not understanding, which is your fiance in a bloody mess on the floor, and Sam not being a trained professional, someone who's probably not accustomed to responding to emergencies like you and I are, he might be thrown a little bit, but he says that maybe she slipped, maybe she hit her head, eventually going to the point where he says she fell on a knife. So he has kind of this evolving story about what he's seeing and what happened to Ellen. And of course, when you put it all together in that supercut, it doesn't seem like a coherent story about what happened to her. The last thing that I find very interesting, Drew, and I want to get your take on this, is that the dispatcher asks him about, did you touch anything? Is there a sign of forced entry? We're already transitioning over from saving someone in a medical crisis to crime scene analysis. Do you think that this maybe helped mentally prepare Sam to meet the first wave of investigation and interviewing from the police?
I don't know. It's a very tough call because there's a whole lot to unpack here. But the first thing I want to discuss is the fact that when the police arrived, their observations were that the door was forced open just as he said it was, that the screws were loose, like they were out of the wood. So it appeared that he had forced his way in there. There's more to that story, though, as it relates to the concierge of the building. And that seems to be the only way in, because there is a balcony, but there was this fresh layer of snow and there was no footprints. There was no nothing. And the windows weren't tampered with, or it would seem that whoever did the stabbing came and went from that front door. And if that front door was latched it indicates that it was done from the inside, unless you have like this really intricate plan or really intricate tool to lock it. Sam's demeanor when he talks to the concierge, he's first met in the hallway by a neighbor who says, like he's trying to get in this apartment because he went down to work out and he came back up and he couldn't get in and he couldn't get a hold of Ellen. And the neighbor is walking by because he hears the commotion and he says, I'm locked out of the apartment. And he was like, well, just go down to the concierge. They have a master key. And he's like, no, the key is not the problem. The door's latched. And he saw that. The guy saw that. So he's like, well, maybe they have a tool or something. So that's what prompted him to go downstairs. Maybe he was already thinking that. So you already have this in mind. Like there's already somebody else that has seen this. And I think a lot of people have made up their minds that this is either a self-deletion or this is a homicide that Sam committed. But that's not necessarily true. Those aren't the only options. If it is in fact a homicide, it doesn't necessarily mean that he committed it. Now, what is peculiar is like his tone and his word choice. Those are definitely active elements that should go into the analysis, because he does seem remarkably calm at points. And you tell me, because you've got over 10,000 911 calls by my estimation under your belt, it's completely hard to say whether people are going to be freaked out or whether they're going to be completely calm or whatever, or somewhere in the middle. Doesn't he seem more amenable to the instructions than most people in his position?
He does. And you can look at some of the most famous cases out there. If you look at Darlie Routier, she's someone that dialed 911 and was later convicted of stabbing her own sons to death. If you want to look at a couple of contemporary cases that we've covered recently on the Comm Center, down in Florida, Anthony Shea, and then also Caleb Flynn, both of those guys were way over the top dramatic on their 911 calls of finding their slain loved ones. These people who are normally perpetrators of these crimes and then call 911 as an alibi, they tend to oversell it. Sam here is excited. He's distraught. He doesn't know what to do, but he doesn't come across as someone who's completely hysterical, like someone like Darlie Routier. If you've ever heard that one, it's kind of a famous case that goes way back. But before we move on to some of the things about police officers and dispatchers' interactions and some of those forensic things, you mentioned something when you talked about the snow that was outside that's interesting to me. We're talking about a closed system when it comes to Sam's movements. He left the apartment. He's seen on some cameras moving around the apartment. I think the exercise equipment that he used was part of the apartment building. I think there's video of him. There's video of him approaching the concierge desk. He's in gym clothes. He's not walking around outside in Philadelphia on a snowy day wearing a t-shirt and shorts. That's another part of his story that just seems to jibe with him leaving the apartment, walking around for a short time, going down to the gym down on the first floor probably, and then coming back. It's not just that whatever he would have been wearing during the attack had to have been covered with physical evidence, because that was a vicious attack and there was physical evidence everywhere. It was all over the kitchen. It would have been on him. But that the clothing that he would have been wearing during that attack has never been found. There was no signs of cleanup. There was no residual evidence in the bathroom and the drains and the sinks. So if he attacked Ellen, the clothes he was wearing have disappeared from the face of the earth, and he couldn't throw them over the balcony for all to see. He couldn't stuff them in a closet where no one would ever search. And whatever he would have washed off his hands would have left trace evidence behind it. And there's none of that. So I think those things, if it is a homicide, points actually very strongly to a third party, even though we're always looking at the romantic partner in these things to say it's a case of domestic violence. I think just the fact that he's wearing these gym clothes is something else I never thought of that perfectly bolsters his.
So take his words also, because I want to delve into what the operator's words were in a second, because that plays a big factor into this. But take his words, when we take two things into account, we take hindsight and we take priming into account. His words were that, oh my God, like he was trying to get, at the operator's instruction, by the way, trying to get her shirt. The operator said, make sure you rip her shirt, just rip her shirt off, bare her chest is what she said.
Right.
He said, well, it's kind of hard to do because it's a zipper. Oh my God, there's a knife sticking out of her. What did he say? Her knife is sticking out of her chest.
Yeah, her knife is sticking out, which is
Yeah, he said first. He said, "Oh no, she's been she stabbed
herself." Right. So
right.
right. So
Right.
so right. So he leads off with this. It's so tacit and baked in. It's almost implied. It's not just she's been stabbed. It's she stabbed herself.
Right.
And it's not she's been stabbed by someone. She was stabbed by her own knife. And
But
just in a shared apartment, to describe a knife as being hers rather than no one's is rather strange.
It is, and there might be some distancing, like if that were the case. But let's take a look at the hindsight aspect and the priming aspect of that, because when he says, "Oh my God, she stabbed herself," we're assuming that he means she intentionally took this knife and buried it in her chest. But what he follows it up with is, I don't know, maybe she slipped and fell. Maybe she fell on the knife. She stabbed herself could imply that she accidentally stabbed herself. It doesn't necessarily mean that she intentionally stabbed herself in his frame of mind. We are just primed to believe that he said that like it's preloaded, and we're primed to believe that it's somehow nefarious. When in actuality, the statement in and of itself is not necessarily nefarious if you just take into it, we're looking at it from that perspective. Imagine what the cops are looking at from the perspective of what the dispatcher with the 911 operator with the 911 professional puts into the call. So in your experience, John, how much of a role would dispatch priming play into a case like this?
Well, first of all, I think that you're spot on with Sam trying to make sense out of something that he can't, when he sees right away, and he can't make sense out of. And it's hard for all of us in retrospect, even though we have all this rest of the story. We're trying to understand how he went in and saw this knife sticking out of her heart, but didn't see it right away and understand right away. And how could she have fallen on a knife, and then the knife is, if she's lying on her back. But priming is huge. Priming is how you can add color to the events that are going on in an emergency, and you can put ideas not necessarily through words, but sometimes just in feelings and intonations, how you can prepare a police officer going to a scene, especially when a hot call comes out. I had it recently, Drew, where we had a dispatcher take a 911 call, and the caller was just screaming. She was hysterical, and he had to ask her several times. He was yelling, what's happening there? What's going on there? And the caller said, so he just needs to update that cop what's going on. He's talking and he's dispatching at the same time. He's on the phone with this woman. And so he just says, hey, we've got some kind of emergency at this house. And he's got this energy in it. He's got this sense of desperation in it. Well, this police officer drives to the scene, and she gets on the radio, and she asks her sergeant, she says, hey, can I kick in this door? Which, legally speaking, is a big deal, Drew. I'm sure you could attest to that, not only in terms of, the Fourth Amendment, not being able to enter a place without probable cause. Obviously calling for help is an exception to that, but is it necessary? Do we have to damage property and possibly incur a lawsuit when we can wait for someone to open the door? In those few seconds, a dispatcher can take an emergency. In this case, a woman fell and sustained a minor laceration, and we can turn it into something psychologically as powerful as, well, there's possibly a stabbing in progress that we would need to kick down a door. So sometimes it can be as emotional as that, but sometimes it could be very informational, very data driven. So when this 911 dispatcher is talking to Sam and they're conferring together, it's almost like they're getting their stories straight together, is what it sounds like to me. So what happened? This knife is sticking straight out of her heart. Did she stab herself? Well, the dispatcher kind of confirms that she stabbed herself. Okay, so Sam's initial theory about how this could have happened, which is not a forensic theory at all. It's not based off of anything other than confusion and trying for him to reconcile the reality that there's a knife inside Ellen's heart. How could this have happened if he had to break down the door? How could this be? Well, the dispatcher takes those words, she stabbed herself, and probably puts it into CAD, computer-aided dispatching, which is something that a dispatcher will read out over the radio, and police officers also responding to the scene will read as they can as while they're making their way there, so that the initial narrative before a police officer is even on scene is Ellen stabbed herself before anyone looks at it. And so what you have is is a bias. So you're going to a scene with a bias. You have something in mind about what happened. It's what the caller tells you. And then when you get there, are you suffering from confirmation bias? Are you looking at the things that back up the things that you already believe? Or are you going to go in there with a fresh, open mind, which is not a human inclination, able to dismiss the early narrative that she had stabbed herself? Or do you think that they're going to support or look for evidence that supplies that? Because frankly, it's the easy answer.
Remains to be seen. You know, I don't know if that's where the priming occurred. I don't know if priming occurred, but I can back what I suspect up with the following. You're seeing a copy of the police. This is not the full police report. This is called an activity sheet, and it was from that night, from January 28th, 2011, Lieutenant Bell and Sergeant Cooney. And they say that to summarize this incident, they said that they responded to a radio call reporting a, quote, hospital case, which means a medical emergency of some sort. But when you start digging in to, you know, and then they talk about what they found and all the other stuff. Then they talk about the interviews. And in the interviews, they conduct interviews with the responding officers. That's part of any investigation. And the responding officers have different perspectives on what they were responding to. So I don't know if they changed their mind once they got there, or if they were like just recalling this is what we were responding to. But case in point, P.O. Snipes said that he responded to a radio call of a person with a weapon inside apartment 603. There was another officer, police officer Ransom. He said that he responded to a radio call of a person with a weapon. Sergeant Wilford said that he responded to a call of a stabbing. So at what point did he get the information? The point being, there are several interpretations of what is actually being reported.
Said they were responding to what I would call a weapons violation, someone with a weapon. Another one was kind of a hybrid between the two. Someone had been stabbed. We've seen this before in my job where a police officer, one will go to the correct address and one will go to the other. They both heard the same thing. They both heard the same radio broadcast. The broadcast brought one police officer to where he was supposed to be. The other one wound up on the other side of the block or something. So it's amazing to me that not only can they be primed, Drew, but they can be primed in different ways. But however it is that they felt that to at no point challenging that narrative enough, despite of the overwhelming physical evidence. As I said, she had all these lacerations to her body. To the common person, to our audience, to the people who have been interested in this case in the years since it happened, they all say it's just impossible to believe that you could look at such savage wounds just by sheer number and not think third-party attacker. So how did we get from Sam controlling the narrative, or at least beginning the narrative that she did this herself, to that sort of being confirmed, at least enough to the point where no medical examiner was called to the scene by those officers?
Yeah, I think it's there's an important part of this report here that talks about. It said the body was transported to the office of the medical examiner, and a post-mortem examination was conducted by Dr. Osborne, who made a determination that the cause of death was multiple stab wounds, and the manner of death was ruled a homicide. Now, here's the thing: they very specifically talk about in this summary that the body was viewed by homicide personnel on the night it was originally reported, but the initial investigation was conducted by members of the Northwest Detective Division. And the following description based on observations and notes provided by investigator Olszewski from the Office of the Medical Examiner's Office. So, look, it sounds to me like they had detectives from Northwest Detective Division, not necessarily homicide detectives. I could be completely wrong about that. But it does sound to me like they went, investigated, determined because the door was latched, and looked at the physical evidence, looked at the fact that he didn't have any blood on him, looked at the pristine balcony. She had 20 stab wounds, 10 on the back of the neck. They're not going to be able to see where the stab wounds are, but obviously she was covered in blood. And they made this determination that it was a self-inflicted situation. The body was transported to the medical examiner's office, at which point a homicide detective saw it, and the medical examiner made their determination. But it wasn't at the scene that I can tell. I may be wrong. I could be completely wrong, but from what I could tell, there weren't any homicide detectives at the scene. This does say, however, that on Friday, January 28th, Sergeant Cooney, Detectives Morano, Kane, Byard, and Luck, and Homicide Division, along with officers Fielder, Toll, and Mujica, and the crime scene unit arrived at the scene inside apartment 603 and executed a search and seizure warrant. But that's January 28th.
So that would have been 2 days later.
I'm not going to make the determination. I think that just about anywhere in America, the medical examiner owns the body, so to speak. Like the medical examiner is going to make the determination of, what to do with the body and how the investigation should run, really, because they're the ones that ultimately have to make the ruling. And little did we know that was the most prominent part of this case, because initially the medical examiner said it was a homicide, and then they had that meeting with the state attorney's office and the detectives, and he changed it to like self-inflicted.
And if the scene if it's just ruled right away that no investigation is needed because this death is self-inflicted, how much of a vacuum are we looking at? How much time was there for Sam or anyone else inside that apartment to move or to change things or to destroy the forensic integrity of whatever was there to be found inside the apartment?
Yeah, let's also not forget that 20 stab wounds. You can see the clusters on the front view and the back view. This is obviously just this isn't an official document, but 10 clustered on the back of the neck. And some experts say that's physically impossible. Others, and there's a reason for that. Other experts say, no, that's totally possible. And the depth of the wounds, some penetrating 7 centimeters to 8 centimeters inside the tissue, but others don't penetrate that far, which indicate they might be like hesitation wounds, which she had both on the back of her neck and on her chest. The one on the skull was pretty prominent, but the MEO autopsy initially said there is also Dr. Ross, who said that it severed the cranial nerves in the brain. It resulted in severe pain, cranial nerve dysfunction, neurologic shock, impaired loss of consciousness. So if she was incapacitated early, how were the other 19 wounds? Like, is it a foregone conclusion that this was the initial wound? Then there was also, or is gravity. Like, you can't really talk about this without having the discussion of gravity, because as you can see here, like vertical dripping indicates that there was a massive injury while standing. And then the hair swipe confirms that there was a downward fall, and the final resting place was against the cabinets there. But there was also horizontal blood running on her face. And that caused a lot of questions. That's a forensic problem. Like that's an issue. So, whether it just happened to be that way or if she was set back up or propped up. But even Dr. Henry Lee, who's a very noted forensic guy that just recently passed away, as a matter of fact, the number and type of wound.
Just about the clustering as a layman is that you're not seeing any defensive wounds. You're not seeing anything in the hands. If anyone's coming after her, she's going to hold her hands out. She's going to have her arms out. There's going to be slash marks here. Also, what's a natural inclination is for you to kind of go turtle, for you to turn around and turn what you perceive as a stronger part of your body, the back, towards that person who's attacking you. Everything that's kind of clustered together on her leg, on her chest, and her neck, I'll grant you the neck's weird, but you don't have any of those defensive wounds on the hands, on the arms. And if you're stabbing someone who's right in front of you and they turn away from you, they simply pivot on their heel, they're going to be sustaining wounds right in the center of their back, near their shoulders, their shoulder blade, depending on the height of the attacker. And you don't see that. But you mentioned blood spatter. Blood spatter is now to the point now where we can literally do this mathematically. We can look at a blood spatter, a blood stain on the floor. We can look at the angle of impact. From that, we can extrapolate the distance that it flew, the height, and we can literally take this mathematical formula and we can tell a lot about it. What was the speed of that droplet when it left the body? How far did it fall? What part of the body might it come off of? How high was the attack, or what was the elevation of the attack? And so this forensic examination of the scene can be very highly technical and highly detailed.
I think with a struggle of this that creates this much chaos, that creates this much of a mess, so to speak. And I'm not trying to belittle poor Ellen, like God rest her soul. And I understand, families are grieving and all of that. Like we're just trying to dissect what we know, or what we think we know, or what we're learning. But the scene itself, it leaves a few questions. Were there signs of a struggle or a cleanup? Because the furniture all appeared to be in place, just like I said at the beginning, no signs of a struggle in the rest of the apartment. There was nothing obviously missing or disturbed. There was some, there was some stuff in the other room that just like a casual burglar probably would have wanted to take, but they didn't take it. And then the sink itself, this is another like Corey Richins situation with the sink coming into play after the fact, but the sink itself had 2 knives in it. They were clean. It was a dry sink, and it was adjacent to a heavily bloody scene. There were blood swipe marks on the cabinet door, which would indicate her either putting her hand up or sliding back, the blood from her hair or whatever. But the counter also had an overturned heavy wooden knife block, which like reading into this, and again, priming it plays a part in hindsight, plays a part in this. Is that because she made her final decision and just like needed to go for it before she changed her mind? Or is that the sign of
struggle?
Yeah, the only sign of struggle that we see was this overturned knife block, which like I don't find likely, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's the definitive answer. Like I don't want to, pretend like I know, but it would seem that there would be a lot more to that then. There's also some questions about like the fatal chest wound under 2 layers of clothing. She had a hoodie on and she had a sweatshirt on underneath. It was a snowy day. It was, in fact, the reason she was home is she left work because they were closing schools because of the snowstorm that was headed. Or maybe it was a t-shirt under her hoodie, but at any rate, that's like 10 centimeter. That's thick clothing. That's a lot of clothing to have to get through. So there's a quote from one of the doctors that says, a suicide victim will rarely stab herself through her clothing. Instead, she'll open her shirt to expose the skin. Stabbing through the clothing may indicate a homicide. This case is totally like that. Like every expert even is saying, well, most of the time it's this, but it could be this. And then the other half is saying, no, you're wrong. Most of the time it's this, but it could be this. And it's confusing. It's conflicting. And, this poor family is sitting in the lurch. They obviously believe that this is not, her harming herself, which I understand why they would do that. But, so what it all boils down to is the investigation and whether or not there were witnesses. So if you want to talk about witnesses, let's have this quick discussion. 4:51, the fiance enters the gym. 5:30, he returns. He begins knocking. He didn't force entry until 6:30. They say somewhere in this Office of the Medical Examiner investigation report, a security man was present during the entry, which is not completely true. I think they misunderstood that. There was security camera footage that showed that that he never left the desk. Now, what he can't testify to the fact that he saw Samuel Goldberg kick the door in. He can't testify to that. He wrote an affidavit and swore to it that specifically counters that, as a matter of fact. What he can testify to, the fact that when Samuel Goldberg was standing in front of him, he being the concierge, the security guy, called the apartment manager to ask the same questions. And then I believe the discussion turned into, well, he's about to, I think Sam even got on the phone with the apartment manager and they said, look, push in with your shoulder. It's probably easier because there's just 4 screws that's kind of holding that thing up there. So there is somebody that can testify that they gave instructions of how to enter the apartment. So though it looks like, well, they relied on this guy, the security guard, being there, being present, but the security footage actually shows something different. Doesn't necessarily mean there's anything nefarious. It just means that they are unable to they aren't able to support what's in the official record of the medical examiner. But there are other means of testifying around that. It doesn't mean that, it didn't happen that way.
This is just an extraordinary case of exceptions. I mentioned it in our last episode that you have so many homicides and you have so many self-inflicted deaths a year, and these things are going to be largely routine, but every once in a while you're going to get a statistical outlier. The mere fact that this case, that the ruling on the manner of death has changed so many times, makes it a statistical outlier. But when you look at the scene and you look at in part 3, what else do we need to look at before we can fully understand the death of Ellen Greenberg? We're
going to probably dive a little bit deeper into the experts versus the official record, because there's a lot of post hoc affidavits. There's a lot of investigations that the families paid for. There's a lot of investigations that contradict what the official record is. And this becomes the battle of the experts, but is it in the interest of the people, or is it in the interest of the family? And again, just like you said, they have nothing to gain either. They have nothing to prove other than their daughter was taken by someone else instead of, it took her own life, which is sad either way. But it does seem like that they are a little suspicious of Sam. And if the evidence isn't leading anybody there, I think the medical examiner's initial ruling, or not initial ruling, but his updated ruling, was that he didn't want to put anybody in any kind of legal jeopardy based on the information that the Philadelphia PD and the DA's office provided. So that's why he changed his ruling, because it didn't sit well with him. Go back to part 1 and watch from the beginning, and we could just continue our series from there.
Yeah, if you watch this point in the video, it means you obviously love this content. And if you loved it, YouTube loves to see a subscription come out of that. So help yourself get more access to great content like this. Help YouTube know that it should show it to people like you. We'd appreciate a subscription. Consider becoming a member. Also, we're on Spotify. We have bonus material on Spotify. If you're interested in getting even more Comm Center in a traditional podcast format, you can go there to find us. You can also find us on all the socials, but also make sure to go back to our full library. Check out great videos like these. Drew, it was a great episode. I'll see you back here next week.
911 emergency, police or paramedics.
He's going westbound on foot. Westbound on foot. There we go.